I am Sophia, 27 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was just an ordinary kindergarten teacher barely making ends meet in my tiny studio apartment. My grandparents, Margaret and Walter, raised me more than my own parents ever did. They were wealthy but humble, always telling me that character matters infinitely more than cash in the bank. When they died in that horrific accident, I thought my world had ended. Then came the lawyer meeting that changed everything and revealed just how twisted my family really was. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to understand something crucial about my childhood. My parents, Kenneth and Linda, were physically present but emotionally absent throughout my entire life. My father worked 70-hour weeks climbing the corporate ladder, convinced that success meant sacrificing everything else. My mother spent her days networking with the right social circles, treating relationships like business transactions. Family dinners were rare, and when they happened, someone was always on their phone or planning their next career move. From age 5, I spent every weekend and summer with Margaret and Walter. Their modest 4-bedroom house became my sanctuary, my real home. Despite having significant wealth from their successful logistics company, they lived simply and purposefully. Their 3-acre property had a vegetable garden where Walter taught me to grow tomatoes and carrots. Margaret showed me how to bake cookies from scratch and mend clothes instead of throwing them away. They attended every school play and soccer game my parents missed, which was most of them. My grandparents built their fortune from absolutely nothing. They started Walter Logistics in their garage during the 1970s with 1 truck and an enormous dream. By the time I was born, the company had become a regional powerhouse with 200 trucks and warehouses across 4 states. Yet you would never know their net worth by looking at them. Walter drove the same pickup truck for 20 years. Margaret clipped coupons religiously and bought clothes during end-of-season sales. They always told me, money is just a tool. Sophia, not a measurement of your worth. Use it to build something meaningful, not to impress people who do not matter. This philosophy created constant tension with my father, Kenneth. As their only son, he grew up expecting to inherit everything and live lavishly without effort. He resented their frugality, calling them stingy and old-fashioned behind their backs. What they saw as character building, he viewed as unnecessary deprivation. They paid for his college education completely, but expected him to work summer jobs like any other student. When he graduated, they helped with a down payment on a modest starter home, not the luxury condo he demanded. The final break came when Kenneth demanded a senior position at their company despite having zero relevant experience. Margaret and Walter refused, saying he needed to earn respect like everyone else. He stormed out, taking a corporate job instead, and their relationship never recovered. Family gatherings became tense affairs filled with passive-aggressive comments and barely concealed resentment. For me, they took a completely different approach. They paid for my education in full, allowing me to graduate debt-free from college. But they encouraged me to choose a career based on passion rather than profit potential. When I decided to become a kindergarten teacher, they were genuinely thrilled even though my starting salary was barely above minimum wage. They understood that I wanted to make a difference in young lives, just as they had made a difference in mine. Throughout my adult life, I maintained the closest possible relationship with Margaret and Walter. We had standing Sunday dinners every single week without exception. I helped them navigate new technology, setting up their smartphones and showing them how to video chat with distant relatives. They taught me their family recipes and shared stories about their youth that I treasured like precious gems. During holidays, I always stayed with them rather than at my parents' house, which caused endless friction with Linda, who saw it as a personal rejection of her hospitality. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment about 20 minutes from their home. It was small but cozy, filled with secondhand furniture and plants I had rescued from various sales. My salary at Sunshine Elementary School was modest, but it covered my basic needs. I found genuine joy in simple pleasures like reading library, books, hiking in the state park, and volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. Margaret and Walter respected my independent lifestyle completely, though they occasionally surprised me with practical gifts like new winter tires or a high-quality blender when mine broke. 6 weeks ago, everything changed in the most devastating way possible. I was grading papers on a Tuesday evening, enjoying the quiet of my apartment, when my phone rang with an unknown number. The police officer on the other end delivered news that shattered my world completely. Margaret and Walter had been driving home from their favorite restaurant when a drunk driver ran a red light, hitting their car at full speed. They died instantly, he said, assuring me they did not suffer. That brought absolutely no comfort whatsoever. The funeral became a circus that revealed everything wrong with my family. Kenneth and Linda immediately took charge of arrangements, arguing with the funeral director about costs like they were negotiating a business deal. My brother Trevor flew in from California, spending most of his time on phone calls about some cryptocurrency investment opportunity. My Aunt Brenda cried dramatically whenever cameras appeared, but stopped the moment people looked away. Her husband Gary just stood awkwardly in corners, following Brenda around like a lost shadow. None of them had visited Margaret and Walter in years, yet suddenly they were all acting like the grieving family members. I felt completely numb throughout the entire service. The two people who truly understood and supported me were gone forever, and their warm, inviting home now stood empty and cold. What I did not know was that in 2 weeks, I would receive a phone call that would change my life forever and reveal just how far my family was willing to go for money they had never earned. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call that would turn my entire world upside down. Marcus Goldstein, my grandparents' attorney, requested that I, along with my immediate family, come to his office for the reading of the will. His voice was gentle but formal, giving no hint of the earthquake that was about to hit my family. Morning of the will reading dawned gray and drizzly, matching my emotional state perfectly. I arrived at Goldstein Legal 15 minutes early, dressed in a simple black dress and carrying the umbrella Margaret had insisted I keep in my car for emergencies. The office was housed in a converted Victorian mansion downtown. Its interior, warm with rich wood paneling and comfortable leather chairs that spoke of old money and established trust. Marcus Goldstein greeted me with a gentle handshake and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He appeared to be in his early 60s with silver hair and the sort of calm presence that made you feel safe. Margaret and Walter had mentioned him often as both their attorney and close friend for over 30 years. "I am so sorry for your loss, Sophia," he said quietly, his genuine emotion evident. "Margaret and Walter were extraordinary people. I will miss our monthly chess games and her incredible lemon bars at every meeting." His authentic grief made my eyes well up with fresh tears. "Thank you," I managed to whisper. "They spoke so highly of you too." Before we could continue our conversation, the glass front door swung open dramatically, and my family arrived all at once like a small army. Kenneth entered first, immediately checking his expensive Rolex with obvious impatience. At 58, he looked like an older, harder version of Walter, but completely lacking any warmth or kindness. Linda followed close behind, clutching her designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Trevor swaggered in wearing sunglasses indoors, his idea of business attire being a wrinkled button-up shirt half-tucked into expensive jeans. Behind them came Brenda, already, talking loudly on her phone about some perceived slight from her country club friends. Gary trailed behind everyone else, nodding politely to me but quickly averting his eyes when Kenneth glared in our direction. They had been married for 20 years, but I had rarely heard Gary speak more than a few sentences at any family gathering. "Well, let us get this over with," Kenneth announced without bothering with greetings or condolences. "Some of us have actual businesses to run and important meetings to attend." Marcus smiled thinly, clearly unimpressed by Kenneth's rudeness. "Of course, Kenneth. Please follow me to the conference room. We are all here now." The tension in the room was immediately palpable as we settled around a large oak conference table. Kenneth sat at one end as if claiming natural authority, while I chose a seat near Marcus's position at the head. The others arranged themselves according to their usual family alliances. Linda next to Kenneth, Trevor slouching next to her, and Brenda positioning herself across from them with Gary beside her looking uncomfortable. "Before we begin," Marcus said carefully, "I want to clarify that Margaret and Walter were of completely sound mind when they updated their will just last year. They were thoroughly deliberate in their considerations and absolutely explicit in their final wishes." Kenneth snorted dismissively. "Just read it, Marcus. We all know how this goes. Dad built the business from nothing. I am his only son. This is standard inheritance procedure." Marcus ignored the interruption completely and opened a thick leather portfolio with practiced precision. He adjusted his glasses and began reading in his clear, professional voice. I, Walter Alexander, and I, Margaret Alexander, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this our last will and testament. The formal legal language continued for several minutes, with Marcus detailing revocations of previous wills and appointment of executors. My family shifted impatiently in their chairs, clearly wanting to skip to the money portion. Kenneth drummed his fingers on the table. Linda checked her phone repeatedly. Trevor played some sort of game on his device. Finally, Marcus reached the IE section everyone was desperately waiting for. The room went completely silent, every person leaning forward slightly. We hereby bequeath our entire estate, including but not limited to all cash assets totaling approximately $8 million, our investment portfolio valued at approximately $12 million, all real estate holdings including our primary residence valued at $4 million, and our complete ownership stake in Walter Logistics valued at approximately $3 million, to our beloved granddaughter, Sophia Grace Foster. The silence that followed was deafening. I stopped breathing completely for a moment, certain I had misheard something crucial. $27 million. They had left me $27 million. Marcus continued reading in the same calm tone. We specifically and intentionally make no provisions for our son Kenneth Alexander, our daughter-in-law Linda Alexander, our grandson Trevor Alexander, our daughter Brenda Davis, or our son-in-law Gary Davis, as we have provided for them adequately during our lifetime and have made our reasoning clear to our attorney. The explosion that followed was immediate and volcanic. Let me see that document right now, Kenneth shouted, standing up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. He lunged across the table, snatching the will from Marcus's hands and scanning it frantically with wild eyes. This is absolutely ridiculous, Linda joined in, her voice rising to a shriek. $27 million to a kindergarten teacher who would not know the first thing about managing that kind of money responsibly. Trevor slammed his hand on the table so hard that coffee cups jumped. What about me? I am family too. I need startup capital for my business ventures. This is completely unfair. Brenda turned to me with her face flushed bright red with anger. What did you do to them, Sophia? How did you manipulate two elderly people into making such an insane decision? I sat in complete shocked silence, utterly unable to process what was happening around me. $27 million. My modest, humble grandparents had somehow accumulated that enormous sum, and they had chosen to leave every single penny to me. The room erupted into complete chaos. Everyone was shouting at once, voices overlapping in a cacophony of greed and outrage. This will be contested immediately. She obviously manipulated them. No judge will uphold this insanity. There has to be a mistake. Marcus calmly retrieved the will from Kenneth's grip with surprising firmness. If you will all please take your seats, there is actually more. Margaret and Walter recorded a video message specifically to be played at this time. Marcus pressed a button on a remote control, and the large screen on the wall illuminated with crystal clear clarity. My heart clenched painfully as Margaret and Walter appeared, sitting side by side on their familiar living room sofa. They looked exactly as they had during my last visit just weeks before the accident. Walter in his favorite blue cardigan, Margaret wearing the pearl earrings I had given her for Christmas. Walter spoke first, his voice strong and clear. If you are watching this recording, it means we have passed on to whatever comes next. We want to explain our decisions directly and personally to prevent any misunderstandings or false assumptions. Margaret continued seamlessly. Kenneth, Brenda, we love you as our children, but we have been deeply disappointed by the values you have embraced and passed down to your own children, with the notable exception of Sophia. For the next 10 minutes, my grandparents methodically explained their reasoning with devastating precision. They detailed decades of watching Kenneth and Brenda prioritize material wealth over genuine relationships, treating them as a resource, to be exploited rather than parents to be cherished and respected. They spoke about years of missed family events, broken promises, requested loans that were never repaid, and dismissive attitudes toward their modest lifestyle choices. The business we built, Walter said with quiet dignity, was never about accumulating wealth for its own sake. It was about creating security for our family and opportunities for our employees. We built everything through hard work, absolute integrity, and treating every person fairly regardless of their position. Margaret's voice was filled with warmth as she added, Sophia is the only family member who has consistently demonstrated these core values that we hold sacred. She visits us not because she wants something material, but because she genuinely cares about our well-being and happiness. The video continued with heartbreaking detail. They described how Sophia had chosen a career helping children despite the modest pay because it fulfilled her sense of purpose. They talked about her weekly visits, her help with technology, her patience in teaching them new things, and her genuine interest in their stories and experiences. We trust Sophia completely to be a wise steward of what we have built, Walter continued with absolute conviction. She will honor our legacy and use these resources thoughtfully, not squander them on status symbols or risky get-rich-quick schemes. Margaret looked directly into the camera as if speaking to each of us personally. We hope this inheritance will allow Sophia to expand her positive impact on the world, perhaps through education and community development, areas we always cared deeply about but had limited time to address while running our business. As the video progressed, they expressed specific hopes for how the money might be used to support educational initiatives, help underprivileged children, and strengthen the community they had called home for 50 years. Their vision was clear, purposeful, and entirely focused on creating lasting positive change. The final moments of the recording were the most emotional. Margaret's eyes glistened with tears as she said, To Kenneth, Brenda, Trevor, and our other family members, we hope someday you will understand that love cannot be measured in dollars. We pray that our decision will encourage you to examine your priorities and perhaps discover what truly matters in life. Walter concluded with words that would haunt my family forever. Sophia, sweet girl, use this gift wisely. Remember that money is just a tool. The real inheritance we leave you is the example of how to live with purpose, integrity, and genuine care for others. As the screen went dark, the silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Then Kenneth exploded like a volcano that had been building pressure for decades. This is complete garbage, he roared, his face turning dangerous shades of red and purple. They were obviously senile and confused. No rational person makes decisions like this. We will contest this will immediately. Marcus remained perfectly calm despite the chaos erupting around him. They anticipated that exact response, Kenneth. Margaret and Walter underwent extensive cognitive testing with multiple independent doctors before finalizing this will. Every physician certified their complete mental competence. Additionally, they documented years of interactions and behaviors that informed their decision. He paused meaningfully before delivering the crushing blow. I must advise you that contesting this will would be extremely difficult, extraordinarily expensive, and highly unlikely to succeed, given the overwhelming evidence they compiled. Linda immediately changed tactics, her voice suddenly becoming honey-sweet and manipulative. Sophia, darling, you have to understand this is not right or fair. Your grandparents were obviously confused and not thinking clearly. This money belongs to the entire family, not just you. You will share it with us, won't you? You are too smart and kind to be selfish. I felt completely cornered with all eyes boring into me like laser beams. The weight of their expectations, anger, and desperation was crushing. I have to think about this, I stammered weakly. I had absolutely no idea they would do something like this. Think about it? Trevor scoffed with obvious contempt. There is nothing to think about. That money should be divided equally among actual family members, or at minimum managed by someone with real business experience. Kenneth interjected forcefully, meaning me, obviously. I have the education, experience, and connections to handle this responsibly. As the arguing intensified and voices rose to near shouting levels, Marcus gently touched my arm with paternal concern. You do not have to decide anything today, Sophia. Take all the time you need to process this enormous change. My office will handle all immediate legal and financial matters related to the estate. He handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with official-looking tape. This contains all relevant documents, keys to their house and vehicles, and contact information for their financial advisors and business managers. Please call me anytime with questions, concerns, or if you need any assistance whatsoever. The meeting dissolved into complete chaos after that, with threats of lawsuits flying like bullets and accusations of manipulation echoing off the walls. Marcus eventually had to ask everyone to leave, stating firmly that he had another appointment and could not extend the meeting further. As we filed out of the office like survivors of a disaster, Kenneth grabbed my arm roughly, his grip tight, enough to leave marks. "This discussion is absolutely not over, Sophia," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Come to our house tonight at exactly 6 o'clock. We will sort this mess out as a proper family should." His tone made it crystal clear this was not a request or invitation. It was a command backed by implied threats. I nodded numbly, too overwhelmed and emotionally drained to argue or resist. As my family departed in their separate luxury vehicles, I sat alone in my 10-year-old sedan in the parking lot, clutching the envelope and wondering how an inheritance meant to be a blessing had so quickly transformed into what felt like a curse. I spent the afternoon driving aimlessly around town, my mind spinning with confusion and disbelief. The envelope from Marcus sat unopened on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb. Part of me desperately wanted to peek inside to understand exactly what Margaret and Walter had entrusted to me. Another part was absolutely terrified of the enormous responsibility it represented and what it might mean for my simple, quiet life. At 5:45, I pulled into my parents' circular driveway, noting that everyone else had already arrived, for what felt increasingly like an ambush. Their 5,000-square-foot house loomed before me, all granite facades and floor-to-ceiling windows designed to impress visitors rather than welcome family. The architecture was cold and imposing, much like the people who lived inside it. I took several deep breaths, grabbed the envelope, and headed toward the front door with growing dread. They were waiting for me in the formal living room, a space that was rarely used except for Linda's elaborate social gatherings and business entertaining. Kenneth stood authoritatively by the marble fireplace, a crystal tumbler of expensive scotch already in his hand despite the early hour. Linda perched on the edge of an uncomfortable-looking designer chair that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Trevor sprawled across the leather sofa, scrolling through his phone and occasionally snorting at whatever he was reading. Brenda paced nervously back and forth like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floors. Gary stood silently by the window, gazing out as if desperately wishing to be anywhere else in the world. "Finally," Kenneth said curtly when I entered the room. "Sit down, Sophia. We need to discuss this situation like reasonable adults." I chose a chair near the doorway, suddenly acutely aware that I might need a quick exit strategy. The atmosphere felt hostile and predatory, like I had walked into a boardroom full of sharks who smelled blood in the water. "Let us be completely reasonable about this unfortunate situation," Kenneth began, slipping into his practiced business negotiation voice. "Your grandparents clearly were not thinking with full clarity. They obviously meant for the entire family to benefit from their estate, not just one person." Linda nodded enthusiastically, jumping in with her own manipulation tactics. "Sweetheart, managing significant wealth is incredibly complicated and stressful. Your father has decades of experience handling complex financial matters. You can still receive a generous portion, perhaps enough for a down payment on a real house instead of that tiny apartment you are living in." The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl, but I remained silent, watching their coordinated performance unfold. Emboldened by my apparent compliance, Kenneth continued with growing confidence. "Here is exactly what we propose, and I think you will find it more than fair. You sign over the estate management to me as the natural financial head of this family. I will ensure everyone receives their appropriate share based on actual need and contribution. You would receive 10%, which is more than generous considering your limited financial needs and experience." 10%. I finally found my voice. "That would still be over $2.5 million. "Exactly," Trevor jumped in eagerly. "More than enough for a teacher to live comfortably. Meanwhile, I need at least $5 million for my revolutionary cryptocurrency exchange platform. It is going to completely disrupt the entire digital currency market." I looked at him with barely concealed skepticism. Trevor had bounced between various get-rich-quick schemes for years, never holding any job longer than 3 months. His most recent venture, an app for rating public restrooms, had collapsed spectacularly after burning through $50,000 of my parents' money in less than 6 months. The house should obviously come to us, Brenda interjected with obvious entitlement. We have 3 children to consider, and that neighborhood would give them access to much better schools and opportunities. I almost laughed out loud at this sheer absurdity. Brenda had visited Margaret and Walter maybe 5 times in the past decade. Her children, my supposed cousins, were complete strangers who sent obligatory birthday cards written entirely in Brenda's handwriting. As the evening progressed, their tactics evolved and became increasingly sophisticated. When direct demands failed to work, they seamlessly switched to emotional manipulation and guilt. "After everything we have done for you throughout your life," Linda said dramatically, her eyes becoming suspiciously moist on command. "We gave you life, a good home, educational opportunities, love, and support. This is how you repay family loyalty and sacrifice?" I nearly choked on my water. Loyalty? When was the last time either of you called just to check on my well-being? When did you ever attend one of my school performances or teacher appreciation events? Kenneth immediately changed strategies again, moving from guilt to direct intimidation. "We are not asking you to do the right thing, Sophia. We are telling you exactly what will happen next. Either you sign the transfer documents voluntarily and immediately, or we will contest this will with every legal resource at our disposal." He leaned forward menacingly. "We will bring up every questionable interaction you had with your grandparents. How often did you visit them alone without other family present? What exactly did you tell them about us when we were not there to defend ourselves? We will make this process as ugly and public as possible." The threat hung in the air like poison. Gas. I felt physically sick, but something deep inside me began to harden with determination. A sudden memory surfaced of Walter teaching me to stand my ground during a playground dispute when I was 8 years old. "No one can take your dignity, unless you give it away willingly, Sophia," he had said gently but firmly. "Know what is right in your heart and hold firm to those principles." Gary, who had remained completely silent throughout the evening, suddenly spoke up quietly. "Maybe we should all calm down and give Sophia some time to process this enormous change. This is obviously a lot for anyone to handle." Kenneth immediately rounded on him with fury. "Stay out of this, Gary. This is family business that does not concern you." "I am family," Gary responded with rare courage, but immediately retreated when Kenneth's glare intensified. As the clock ticked past 9 o'clock, Trevor started drafting transfer paperwork on his laptop with obvious excitement. Linda called their personal attorney for advice on proper legal wording. Brenda scrolled through real estate listings for Margaret and Walter's house, talking enthusiastically about which walls she would knock down first to create a more modern floor plan. They had already divided my inheritance completely among themselves without my consent, mapping out exactly how they would spend every single dollar. Not once did anyone mention Margaret and Walter's wishes, values, or carefully considered legacy. Not once did they ask what I thought should be done with the money or how I felt about this massive responsibility. At 10:30, Kenneth printed out the crude transfer document and slid it across the polished coffee table toward me, along with an expensive fountain pen. "Sign it," he demanded with cold finality. "Right now." I picked up the paper and read through it carefully, my hands trembling slightly. The language was deliberately broad and vague, essentially signing away all my rights to anything Margaret and Walter had left me. In exchange, I would receive a percentage to be determined later at Kenneth's sole discretion. I put the paper down slowly and took the deepest breath of my life. No. The word came out stronger and clearer than I had expected. The room went completely silent, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Everyone stared at me in stunned disbelief, clearly not having expected any resistance to their carefully orchestrated plan. "What did you just say?" Kenneth asked, his voice dangerously low and controlled, like the calm before a devastating storm. I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. I said no. I will not sign this document or anything like it. Margaret and Walter trusted me with their legacy for very specific reasons. I intend to honor that trust completely. The explosion that followed was immediate and volcanic. Linda launched into a screaming tirade about ingratitude and selfishness that could probably be heard 3 houses away. Trevor jumped up from the sofa, calling me names that I will not repeat, his face twisted with pure rage and entitlement. Brenda began sobbing dramatically about her children's future being destroyed by my greed, though the tears seemed remarkably controlled and calculated. Through all the chaos and shouting, I sat perfectly still, letting the word no become an invisible shield around me. Each time they demanded explanations or tried new manipulation tactics, I simply repeated the same response calmly and clearly. Finally, Kenneth slammed his crystal glass down on the side table so hard that it cracked completely in half, sending expensive scotch splashing across the white marble surface. "That is enough," he roared with a fury I had never seen before. "I should have known you could not be trusted. I always told Dad you were manipulative and scheming, just waiting for the right opportunity to take advantage of them." He stalked toward me with predatory intent, pointing his finger just inches from my face. "You obviously poisoned their minds against their own children with lies and manipulation. Now you are trying to manipulate us with this innocent victim act." His voice rose to a thunderous volume that seemed to shake the windows. "You have exactly one choice to make right now. Sophia, either you sign that paper immediately and remain part of this family, or you take your precious inheritance and consider yourself completely disowned. You cannot have both." The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a sword waiting to fall. I looked around the room slowly, searching the faces of my family members for any sign of genuine love, understanding, or basic human decency. I found absolutely none. Their expressions ranged from cold anger to calculating greed to bitter resentment. In that crystalline moment of clarity, I realized a painful but liberating truth. They had never really seen me as family. I was just a means to an end, a potential source of money they felt entitled to, nothing more than a business transaction that had gone wrong. "I am not signing anything," I said firmly, standing up with newfound strength and dignity. "I am sorry you feel this way, but I have to respect what Margaret and Walter wanted. They were the wisest people I have ever known." Kenneth's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Then get out of my house right now. Pack your pathetic belongings and leave tonight. You are no longer welcome here or anywhere else in this family. I live in my own apartment," I reminded him with growing confidence. "I have for several years now." He laughed with cold, cruel satisfaction. "The apartment we co-signed for because your pathetic teacher salary could not qualify for the lease on its own. Did you bother to check your rental agreement carefully? Sophia? We own that entire building through one of our investment companies. Consider your lease officially terminated." My stomach dropped sickeningly as I realized he was telling the truth. When I could not qualify for the apartment rental on my teacher's income alone, they had offered to help as co-signers. I never realized they actually owned the building through some complex shell company arrangement that gave them complete control. "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack essential items," Linda announced, checking her diamond-encrusted watch with theatrical precision. "The locks will be changed first thing tomorrow morning. Security will be notified that you are no longer authorized to be on the property." I stood frozen in complete shock. They were actually making me homeless, turning me out onto the streets over money they had never earned or deserved. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Clock is ticking, sis." Trevor smirked with obvious satisfaction. "Better hurry up. Those $27 million will not keep you warm tonight if you are sleeping in your car." 30 minutes is not nearly enough time to pack up an entire life, but I moved on autopilot, my mind spinning with disbelief and determination. I grabbed essential clothes, toiletries, important documents, and a few sentimental items that meant everything to me. Kenneth stood in the doorway of my bedroom like a prison guard, arms crossed, watching every move to ensure I did not steal anything that belonged to them. Linda stayed downstairs, already on the phone with a real estate agent about selling Margaret and Walter's house immediately. Her excited voice carried up the stairs as she discussed renovation plans and market positioning strategies. "You were never really part of this family anyway," Kenneth said with calculated cruelty as I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. "Your mother and I were planning to divorce before she got pregnant with you unexpectedly. You were the obligation that forced us to stay together when we wanted different lives." The casual brutality of his revelation staggered me completely. I had always sensed that I was unwanted, but having it confirmed so bluntly felt like a physical blow to my chest. "We have wasted enough time and money on you over the years," Linda added, appearing in the doorway with perfect timing. "Private, school tuition, orthodontic work, summer camps, all those dance lessons you were terrible at anyway. Consider this the end of our investment in your future." Investment. Not love, care, or parental responsibility, but investment. As if I were a stock that had performed poorly and needed to be sold immediately. Trevor appeared next, leaning against the doorframe with a smug expression that made me want to scream. "You will regret this decision when you have nothing and no one left," he said with obvious glee. "That money will disappear faster than you think, and then what? You will come crawling back to us, and we will remember exactly how you chose cash over family." I zipped up my final bag, fighting back tears through sheer willpower. I was absolutely determined not to cry in front of them and give them that satisfaction. "Is that everything?" Kenneth demanded impatiently. I looked around the room that had been mine since childhood, though I had only stayed there occasionally since college. My ballet trophies from elementary school sat on the dresser, along with my framed college diploma and bookshelves filled with novels and teaching materials. So much of my history was being left behind forever. "I can come back for the rest later," I said hopefully. Kenneth laughed harshly. "There will not be a later. Whatever you leave behind tonight goes to charity or straight to the garbage. Your choice entirely." The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. They were erasing me from their lives completely, all because I would not give them money they had done nothing to earn. I grabbed Margaret's handmade quilt from my bed and stuffed it into my already overflowing bag. I absolutely would not leave that precious memory behind no matter what. With 3 heavy bags slung over my shoulders and another clutched in my hand, I made my way downstairs for what I knew would be the last time. No one offered to help carry anything. At the front door, I turned around one final time, hoping against hope for some sign of regret or reconsideration. My family stood in a perfect line like judges at an execution, their faces set in various expressions of anger, disappointment, and smug satisfaction. There was no love, no sadness, no recognition that they were destroying decades of relationships over money. "You might have money now," Linda said with icy finality, "but family is forever. You will realize what you have thrown away when it is too late to fix it." "I am not the one throwing away family," I replied quietly but firmly. "You are." With those words, I walked out the door and into the cool night air. The heavy door slammed behind me with disturbing finality, like the sound of a coffin being sealed. Standing beside my car in the driveway, I suddenly felt the crushing weight of everything that had happened crashing down on me all at once. I was effectively homeless. My apartment was no longer mine. My family had completely disowned me. In the span of just a few hours, I had gained $27 million but lost the only support system I had ever known. Flawed and conditional, as it had been. I sat in my car and finally allowed the tears to come freely. They streamed down my face in torrents as I gripped the steering wheel, great heaving sobs that made my whole body shake uncontrollably. I cried for Margaret and Walter, whose absence felt more acute and painful than ever. I cried for the family I had always hoped for but apparently never truly had. Mostly, I cried for myself, suddenly adrift in a world that had completely changed in ways I never could have imagined. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I wiped my eyes and started the car with trembling hands. I had nowhere to go. Hotels required credit cards with available limits I did not have. Friends seemed like an option, but explaining this surreal situation at nearly midnight felt impossible and embarrassing. Then I remembered the thick envelope Marcus had given me earlier. Pulling it out with shaking fingers, I found a set of keys, attached to a familiar rabbit-shaped keychain that Margaret had treasured. These were the keys to my grandparents' house, the house that was now, unbelievably, mine. The drive to their neighborhood took 20 minutes through empty streets. With each passing mile, I felt simultaneously pulled toward the comfort and familiarity of their home, yet terrified of entering it without them there to greet me. I had deliberately avoided the house since the funeral, unable to face the overwhelming emptiness and silence. The front porch light was glowing warmly when I arrived, probably controlled by the automatic timer Walter had meticulously programmed. I sat in the driveway for several long minutes, gathering the courage to go inside and face whatever emotions were waiting for me there. Finally, I grabbed one bag and approached the front door, the key shaking violently in my hand as I tried to unlock it. The familiar click of the mechanism felt both comforting and heartbreaking. The house smelled exactly the same. A wonderful mixture of Margaret's favorite lemon verbena potpourri and the wood polish Walter used religiously on all. The furniture every Sunday morning. I flipped on the lights, half expecting to hear their voices calling a warm greeting from the kitchen where they always waited for visitors. The silence was absolutely deafening. I made my way slowly to the guest room I had always used during visits, dropping my bag on the bed I had slept in countless times. Everything was exactly as I had left it after my last weekend visit just 1 month before the accident. The novel I had been reading still sat on the nightstand with a bookmark indicating my progress. Fresh towels were folded neatly on the dresser, placed there by Margaret in anticipation of my next day that would never come. The thoughtfulness of it, the expectation of continuity that they could not have known would be shattered forever, completely undid me emotionally. I sank onto the familiar bed and cried until pure exhaustion overtook me, falling asleep fully clothed on top of the covers. Morning came with disorienting brightness streaming through the lace curtains Margaret had sewn herself. For one blissful moment, I expected to smell coffee brewing downstairs and hear Walter's cheerfully off-key whistling from the kitchen. Reality crashed back immediately as I recognized the profound silence that filled every corner of the house. They were gone forever, and somehow I had inherited both their incredible fortune and their enemies, all in the form of my own biological family. My phone had exploded overnight with texts and missed calls, most from Kenneth and Linda, alternating between aggressive threats and sudden attempts at reconciliation that fooled no one. "We can work this out if you will just be reasonable," read one message from Linda, sent at 2 a.m. Kenneth was characteristically less subtle. "You have 24 hours to reconsider before we file legal action." Trevor had sent just one text, but it sent a genuine chill down my spine. "Enjoying the big empty house? Not for long." That last message sounded like a direct threat, not just empty bluster from a spoiled young man. I immediately forwarded it to Marcus, who responded within minutes despite the early hour. "Stay exactly where you are. I will be there in 30 minutes. Do not open the door for anyone else under any circumstances." His urgent tone was both alarming and strangely comforting. At least someone was genuinely on my side in this nightmare. Marcus arrived exactly 30 minutes later, carrying a leather briefcase and a cardboard drink carrier with 2 steaming cups of coffee. I ushered him into the bright kitchen, where Margaret and Walter had shared thousands of casual meals and conversations. "First things first," he said, sliding a coffee toward me with paternal concern. "Your family contacted 3 different law firms last night about contesting the will. I anticipated this exact scenario and have already prepared comprehensive countermeasures." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup gratefully. "They actually kicked me out last night. Kenneth apparently owns my apartment building through some investment company I never knew about." Marcus nodded grimly, unsurprised by this revelation. Typical Kenneth tactics, using financial leverage to force compliance with his demands. He began pulling official-looking documents from his briefcase. What he conveniently failed to mention is that Margaret and Walter provided for this exact scenario years ago. He showed me a property deed to a small cottage about 20 minutes outside town. "Your grandmother purchased this property 5 years ago as a rental investment, but she kept it in a completely separate trust specifically for you. Kenneth has no knowledge of its existence. You have somewhere safe to go if you need it." Relief washed over me like a warm wave. At least I would not be homeless, regardless of what happened next. "But there is something else you need to know immediately," Marcus continued with growing intensity. "You are definitely not alone in this fight." As if perfectly timed, a gentle knock sounded at the back door. Marcus smiled knowingly. That would be Elena. Elena. The name was vaguely familiar, but I could not immediately place it. Marcus led me to the kitchen door, where I found a woman in her early 50s with warm brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She held her baseball cap respectfully in her hands. "Miss Sophia," she said with genuine warmth and a slight accent. I am Elena Ramirez. I have been your grandparents' estate manager and caretaker for 15 years. I live in the guest house at the back of the property. The simple kindness in her voice nearly brought me to tears again. Elena, of course. Margaret and Walter mentioned you so often. I am sorry we have never properly met. Elena stepped inside, radiating the same calm competence I remembered from my grandparents. Mr. Walter and Mrs. Margaret were wonderful people, like family to me. I saw your car this morning and wanted to check if you needed anything. They asked me to look after you if anything ever happened to them. Marcus invited Elena to join us at the kitchen table. Over the next hour, she shared stories about my grandparents that painted a picture of two people who were deeply respected and genuinely beloved by everyone who worked for them, not just tolerated or feared like so many wealthy employers. Your father and brother, Elena said carefully, clearly uncomfortable discussing family drama. They came here twice after the funeral when they thought no one was watching. They took things, watches, jewelry, some electronics, even small antiques. I have everything recorded on the security cameras. My stomach clenched with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. My father had those cameras installed for security. Years ago. I forgot they were even there. Elena shook her head sadly. Mr. Walter did not trust the old system your father installed. He said it had too many convenient blind spots. Last year, he had me upgrade everything with a completely new company. The new system records everything inside and outside the house, with automatic backup to secure cloud storage. Marcus made detailed notes. That footage could be extremely useful if they pursue legal action. There is more we need to show you. Elena led us to Margaret's small study off the main hallway. Built-in bookcases held dozens of leather-bound journals, each one meticulously dated in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. Elena pulled one volume from the shelf and handed it to me. This one covers when your father asked for money last year for some investment opportunity, she explained gently. I opened the journal immediately, recognizing Margaret's careful script. The entry was dated May 15th. Kenneth visited today. The first time in 8 months. Did not ask about our health or daily lives. Immediately launched into aggressive pitch about cryptocurrency investment requiring $250,000. When Walter refused politely, Kenneth became hostile and accusatory. Said we were naive to trust Sophia when she obviously only visits to secure her inheritance. Could not be more wrong about her character. Sophia has never asked for money, has no idea of our actual net worth, brings homemade food every Sunday, and stays to eat with us because she enjoys our company. Kenneth left without finishing his coffee. Walter was very upset afterward. I read entry after entry, each one documenting years of similar interactions with painful precision. My father demanding money for various schemes. Trevor pitching absurd business ideas that made no financial sense. Linda making thinly veiled comments about their modest lifestyle being embarrassing to her social standing and reputation. In stark contrast, my visits were described with genuine warmth and appreciation. Margaret noted small gifts I had brought, meaningful conversations we had shared, and practical help I had offered around the house. She saw me exactly as I was. Someone who visited because I genuinely cared, not because I wanted something material. As I read through the journals, the doorbell rang. Elena went to answer it, returning with an older woman in a practical dress and comfortable cardigan. Grace Reynolds, Elena introduced her. Your grandparents' housekeeper for 20 years. Grace hugged me tightly, as if I were her own granddaughter. You look exactly like Margaret when she was your age, she said with motherly affection. She was so incredibly proud of you and your teaching career. Over the next several hours, more people began arriving at the house. Each person brought not only valuable information, but genuine love and concern for my well-being. Rosa Martinez, my grandparents' business partner at Walter Logistics, knew every detail of the company operations and offered to guide me through understanding the business side of my inheritance. George Patel, their investment advisor for over 2 decades, brought comprehensive portfolios showing exactly how my inheritance was structured and managed. Sarah Johnson, their neighbor for 30 years, brought a homemade casserole and countless stories about neighborhood gatherings I had attended as a child, back when I felt truly welcomed and loved. Each person who arrived brought not only crucial information about my inheritance, but something far more valuable, genuine affection and concern. They had all loved Margaret and Walter deeply, and by extension, they cared about me and my future. While examining Margaret's desk more thoroughly, Grace discovered a hidden compartment I never knew existed. Inside were dozens of letters from Kenneth spanning several decades, each one requesting money for various schemes and investments. Some contained thinly veiled threats about cutting off my access to my grandparents if they refused his demands. She also kept this, Grace said solemnly, handing me a USB drive. Security footage from immediately after the funeral reception. Your mother went through Margaret's jewelry collection before most guests had even left. She took several valuable pieces, claiming Margaret would have wanted her to have them as keepsakes. My grandparents, it seemed, had been systematically documenting my family's manipulative behavior for years, perhaps knowing that someday they would need evidence to protect their final wishes. They had created not just a financial safety net for me, but a network of genuine support and legal protection that would shield me from family greed. Around 4 in the afternoon, as Marcus was guiding me through complex financial documents that made my head spin, my phone buzzed with another text from Trevor. Hope you are enjoying your time in Grandma and Grandpa's house while you still can. Dad, Mom, Aunt Brenda, Uncle Gary, and I are coming over tomorrow morning at exactly 10 o'clock to collect what rightfully belongs to the real family. Better not try to stop us or things will get very ugly very quickly. I showed the message to Marcus, whose expression immediately darkened with concern and determination. Direct threats and potential breaking and entering, he muttered grimly. I think it is time to activate the final part of your grandparents' comprehensive protection plan. He made several quick phone calls, speaking in legal code about meetings, evidence, and witnesses. When he finished, he turned to me with absolute confidence. Your grandparents anticipated this exact confrontation, Sophia. They knew Kenneth and the others would never accept their decision gracefully. Tomorrow morning, we will be completely ready for whatever they try. He gestured to the pile of journals, financial documents, and legal papers spread across the dining room table like evidence in a major court case. Tonight, I suggest you review these materials carefully so you understand exactly what you are fighting to protect. Your grandparents built much more than just financial wealth. They built relationships based on trust, respect, and genuine care. That is their true legacy to you. As everyone except Elena left for the evening, promising to return first thing in the morning, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me like a protective blanket. I was not alone in this fight. Margaret and Walter had ensured that they had given me not just their money, but their wisdom, their community, and their unwavering support system. I spent the evening reading through journals and financial reports, getting to know my grandparents in completely new ways. They had been strategic, thoughtful, and absolutely meticulous in their planning. Everything they had done was deliberate and purposeful, including their choice of heir. For the first time since the will reading, I felt truly equal to the enormous responsibility they had entrusted to me. As I prepared for bed in my childhood room, another threatening text arrived from Trevor. Better sleep with one eye open, sis. Tomorrow you will see exactly what happens to people who steal from this family. Instead of fear, I felt resolve hardening within me like steel. Tomorrow would indeed show what happens when people try to steal from family, but not in the way Trevor imagined. I woke early the next morning, anxious but absolutely determined. By 8 o'clock, Marcus had arrived with fresh coffee and pastries, along with a thick folder of legal documents. These are restraining orders ready to be filed immediately if necessary, he explained with professional efficiency. And these are cease and desist letters specifically addressing the threats Trevor has been making. Grace arrived next, immediately taking over the kitchen to prepare breakfast for what she knew would be a difficult day. The familiar smells of bacon and fresh coffee filled the house, providing comforting normalcy before the coming storm. Bata iti whites. 9:30. The house had filled with my newly discovered support network. Elena positioned herself strategically by the front door as a silent guardian. Rosa Martinez set up her laptop at the dining table, ready to present financial evidence if needed. Grace bustled around ensuring everyone had coffee and food, her presence alone connecting me to Margaret and Walter's legendary hospitality. At 9:45, multiple cars began pulling into the long driveway like an invading army. First came Kenneth's black luxury sedan, followed by Linda's white SUV, then Brenda and Gary's ridiculous red convertible, and finally Trevor's impractical sports car that he could only afford because my parents subsidized his lifestyle. They are early, Marcus observed calmly, trying to catch us off guard and unprepared. As the doorbell rang aggressively, followed immediately by impatient pounding, Marcus nodded to Elena, who opened the door with quiet dignity. Kenneth stood on the threshold, momentarily surprised to see someone other than me answering the door. Behind him, the rest of my family clustered together with expressions ranging from angry determination to smug anticipation. "Where is Sophia?" Kenneth demanded rudely. "This is private family business that does not concern outsiders." Elena remained, completely immovable. "Miss Sophia is expecting you. Please come inside." My family filed into the spacious foyer, stopping short in obvious surprise when they saw the gathering in the living room. I stood confidently in the center with Marcus slightly behind me to my right, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. "What exactly is this supposed to be?" Linda asked, her voice brittle with nervous energy. "You brought complete strangers into a private family matter?" Before I could respond, the front door opened again, and 3 more people entered with quiet authority. Judge Patricia Clark, a tall, dignified woman in her 70s who had been Margaret and Walter's friend for decades, entered first. She was followed by Police Chief David Brooks, whose daughter's education had been supported by my grandparents' charitable foundation for years. Last came Thomas Chen, my grandparents' financial advisor for over 20 years, carrying a briefcase full of documentation. Kenneth's face went pale at the sight of Judge Clark. She had ruled against him in a business dispute several years earlier, a case Kenneth had tried unsuccessfully to influence through social connections and implied threats. "Patricia," he said, attempting a jovial tone that fell completely flat. "What brings you here on this beautiful morning?" Judge Clark's expression remained stern and professional. "I am here at the specific request of Walter and Margaret Alexander, delivered through their attorney Marcus Goldstein. They asked me, in the event of their deaths, to serve as an impartial witness to any family disputes regarding their estate and final wishes." Linda turned to Chief Brooks with obvious nervousness. "This is completely ridiculous. We are simply here to collect family heirlooms that rightfully belong to us. Why is law enforcement present at a family discussion?" Chief Brooks smiled with professional courtesy. "I am here as a friend of the Alexander family, not in any official capacity, unless, of course, someone commits a crime, in which case my official duties would naturally take precedence over personal relationships." The implied threat was crystal clear to everyone present. As if perfectly choreographed, the back door opened and 6 more people entered, forming a protective semicircle behind me. They were longtime employees from Walter Logistics, people who had known Kenneth since childhood and witnessed his transformation from entitled son to absent family member who only appeared when he wanted money. "You have got to be kidding me," Trevor muttered with obvious frustration. "Is this supposed to intimidate us somehow?" I stepped forward, finding strength in the overwhelming support surrounding me. "I know exactly why you are here. You believe you are entitled to Margaret and Walter's estate despite their explicit wishes and careful planning. You think you can bully or threaten me into giving you what you want?" Kenneth's face hardened with familiar anger. Those confused old people were obviously manipulated by someone with selfish motives. We are simply here to correct that terrible injustice. From behind me, Thomas Chen spoke up with quiet authority. "Actually, Kenneth, I have comprehensive documentation of every attempt you made to access your parents' assets over the last 20 years. He opened his briefcase methodically. "This includes the unauthorized transfer attempt from their retirement account in 2016, the forged check incident in 2018, and your attempt to have Margaret declared mentally incompetent last year after she refused to fund Trevor's failed cryptocurrency venture." Kenneth's face turned bright red. "That is completely taken out of context." Rosa Martinez stepped forward with her tablet ready. "I also have detailed records of the company loan you never repaid, Kenneth. $200,000 borrowed in 2012 for your vacation home in Aspen. Your parents never pursued legal repayment, though they certainly could have destroyed your credit and business reputation." One by one, Margaret and Walter's friends and associates presented damning evidence of my family's attempts to extract money over the years, contrasted sharply with their minimal involvement in my grandparents' actual lives and well-being. Brenda who had been quietly fuming throughout the presentations, suddenly turned to me with pure venom. "You ungrateful little snake! You turned our parents against us with lies and manipulation." Judge Clark cleared her throat with authority. "Actually, Mrs. Davis, I personally reviewed the video journals Margaret kept. There was no external influence whatsoever. Your parents were remarkably clear about their reasoning and decision-making process." "This is all very theatrical," Linda said dismissively. "But it changes absolutely nothing. We will contest this will. We will win." Marcus stepped forward with supreme confidence. "I have prepared comprehensive documentation for each of you." He handed every family member a thick envelope. "This includes evidence that would become public record if you contest the will. I strongly encourage you to review it carefully before making any decisions about legal action." Uncle Gary, who had remained completely silent until now, opened his envelope first and began reading with growing alarm. His face grew increasingly pale with each page he turned. After a long moment, he touched Brenda's arm gently but urgently. "We should leave immediately," he said, quietly but firmly. "This is not a fight we can possibly win." Brenda shrugged him off angrily, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I am not giving up so easily on what is rightfully ours." Kenneth, however, had gone very still after scanning the contents of his envelope. The documents contained records of questionable business dealings he had clearly hoped would remain buried forever, along with transcripts of cruel comments he had made about his parents when he thought no one was listening. There were also copies of threatening emails he had sent to various family friends who had tried to mediate disputes over the years. Chief Brooks stepped forward with professional authority. "I should also mention that this property is now under 24-hour security surveillance. Any attempt to remove items without explicit permission would legally constitute theft, regardless of any perceived family relationships." Elena nodded in confirmation. "The new security system records everything both inside and outside the house, with automatic backup to multiple secure cloud storage locations that cannot be accessed or deleted by unauthorized persons." As my family absorbed the full implications of their situation, I walked calmly to the sideboard and picked up a stack of documents Marcus had prepared specifically for this moment. "These are official cease and desist orders regarding the specific threats you have made against me," I said, handing the papers directly to Trevor. "These threats are now documented and will be reported to authorities if they continue," I continued, passing additional documents to Kenneth. "These are formal notices that I am fully aware of the items taken from this house after the funeral without permission, and I expect their immediate return within 72 hours. My mother began to protest loudly, but I cut her off with newfound authority. "And these," I said, giving Linda the final set of documents, "are the specific terms under which I am willing to maintain any relationship with any of you going forward. They include complete respect for Margaret and Walter's wishes, and an immediate end to all attempts to contest the will or harass me in any way." The room fell into tense silence as my family realized the impossible position they had put themselves in. Not only had Margaret and Walter legally protected their final decisions with overwhelming documentation, but they had anticipated and prepared for every possible challenge or manipulation tactic. The community of genuine support they had carefully built over decades stood firmly united with me, presenting a wall of evidence and authority that my family had never expected to encounter. Kenneth was the first to break under the pressure. "This is not over," he said, but the defeat in his voice suggested otherwise. The fight had gone out of him completely as he realized the extent of the evidence against him. "Actually, Kenneth, it is completely over," Judge Clark replied with finality. "Your parents were absolutely meticulous in their planning and documentation. Any judge in this entire county would uphold their wishes based on the overwhelming evidence they compiled over many years." Trevor glared at me with pure hatred as he prepared to leave. "This is not the end," he muttered threateningly. "Perhaps not," I replied with calm strength I had never known I possessed. "But it is definitely the end of you taking advantage of this family's generosity. Margaret and Walter saw exactly who you really are. That is why we are all standing here today." Linda made one final desperate attempt at manipulation. "Sophia, sweetheart, you cannot possibly want to destroy your family over money. Surely we..." can reach some reasonable compromise that works for everyone. You destroyed this family the moment you chose money over love and respect, I answered quietly but firmly. I am simply honoring the wishes of two people who actually cared about me as a person, not as a source of income. One by one, my family members retreated toward the door, their threats and demands dissolving completely in the face of the overwhelming evidence mounted against them. Their entitled confidence had evaporated, replaced by the sobering realization that they had been comprehensively outmaneuvered by two people they had consistently underestimated. As they filed out to their expensive cars like defeated soldiers, the oppressive tension in the room immediately dissipated. Grace began serving fresh coffee and pastries as if to cleanse the space of all the negative energy that had filled it moments before. The others gathered around me, offering congratulations and continued support. I felt strangely empty, neither triumphant nor devastated. I had successfully stood my ground and protected Margaret and Walter's carefully considered wishes, but I had lost what remained of my biological family in the process. The victory felt hollow and bittersweet. Judge Clark seemed to sense my internal conflict perfectly. She placed a gentle, motherly hand on my shoulder with genuine warmth. Your grandparents would be incredibly proud, Sophia. Not just of what you accomplished today, but how you did it with dignity, principle, and grace under enormous pressure. Rosa nodded enthusiastically in agreement. You are more like them than anyone else in your entire family. That is exactly why they trusted you with everything they had built. As my family's cars disappeared down the long driveway for what I suspected would be the last time, I realized I had crossed a significant threshold in my life. The family I had known since birth was gone forever, but in their place stood a community bound together by something far stronger than blood. Genuine respect, shared values, and authentic care for each other's well-being. This was not the family I had been born into, but perhaps it was the family I was always meant to have. Margaret and Walter had spent their entire lives building not just financial wealth, but relationships based on trust, integrity, and mutual support. That was the true legacy they had entrusted to me. Marcus began organizing the legal documents while the others shared stories and offered practical advice about managing my new responsibilities. For the first time since learning about the inheritance, I felt genuinely ready to embrace both the opportunities and obligations that came with it. The real work was just beginning, but I was no longer facing it alone. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of learning, growth, and profound transformation. The first weeks after the confrontation were admittedly the hardest, filled with complex legal paperwork, overwhelming financial decisions, and the painful but necessary process of accepting that my biological family had chosen money over genuine relationships. They made a few half-hearted attempts at reconciliation over those months, but only when they desperately needed something, proving conclusively that absolutely nothing had really changed about their fundamental character or priorities. With patient guidance from Marcus and my grandparents' trusted financial advisors, I established the Margaret and Walter Foundation for educational excellence, dedicating $10 million specifically to supporting underprivileged students and struggling schools throughout our community. The foundation focused particularly on arts education and vocational training programs, areas my grandparents had always believed were criminally undervalued by traditional educational systems. I made the decision to return to teaching kindergarten at Sunshine Elementary, much to the surprise of those who assumed I would quit working once I became wealthy. My classroom became a showcase for what was genuinely possible when students had access to proper resources and support. I personally funded new books, comprehensive art supplies, and cutting-edge technology that the school budget could never have covered. Every child received healthy snacks daily and warm winter coats if their families needed them. Small expenses for me that made enormous differences in their young lives. Under Rosa Martinez's expert mentorship, I gradually learned the fundamentals of running Walter Logistics. While I did not take an active daily management role, I ensured the company maintained my grandparents' core values, including their generous profit-sharing program for employees and comprehensive retirement benefits. The business continued to thrive under experienced management, providing stable, well-paying employment for over 100 people in our community. Margaret and Walter's house, once painfully empty and silent, gradually became a warm home again. I moved from the guest room into the master bedroom, though it took many months before I could sleep there without feeling like an intruder in someone else's space. With Elena's enthusiastic help, I renovated the large basement into a beautiful community space for foundation events and educational programs that brought the house back to life. Grace still came 3 times a week, absolutely refusing to fully retire despite my repeated insistence that she had more than earned a peaceful retirement. She claimed that keeping busy made her happy, and Margaret's house needed someone who understood how to maintain it properly. My biological family made occasional attempts to re-establish contact, though their motivations remained transparently selfish. Kenneth called when his company faced serious cash flow problems, hinting broadly about short-term loans with attractive returns for family investors. Linda reached out when her social circle learned about my foundation work, suddenly wanting to serve on the board of directors. Trevor texted whenever his latest get-rich-quick scheme failed spectacularly, asking for startup capital for his next revolutionary idea. Brenda called around major holidays, suggesting that families should be together during special times, especially family members with large houses perfectly suitable for hosting elaborate gatherings. Each time, I politely but firmly maintained the boundaries I had established, referring them to the written terms I had provided after our confrontation. I remained open to considering a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine care, but absolutely not one based on financial advantage or manipulation. None of them could meet those simple, reasonable requirements. Instead, I built beautiful new traditions with the chosen family Margaret and Walter had so carefully cultivated over their lifetimes. Sunday dinners continued in their memory, now hosted by me with rotating guests including Rosa, Marcus, Elena, and her family, Grace, and many others who had been part of my grandparents' extended circle of genuine friends. We celebrated holidays together, shared important milestones, and supported each other through various difficulties and challenges. It was not the family I had been born into, but it was a community bound together by something infinitely stronger than shared DNA, common values, mutual respect, and authentic affection that could not be bought or manipulated. One crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after Margaret and Walter's accident, I visited their graves for the first time since the funeral. I brought fresh flowers from their own garden and sat on the small stone bench nearby, finally ready to have the conversation I had been avoiding for months. I am trying my absolute best to honor everything you built together, I told them, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking aloud in the quiet cemetery. The foundation is already making a real difference in young people's lives. 5 students have received full college scholarships who otherwise could never have afforded higher education. Your employees still speak about you both with such genuine respect and affection. A gentle autumn breeze rustled the golden leaves overhead, sending them spiraling downward in a dance that Margaret would have found absolutely beautiful. It was exactly the kind of perfect fall day she had always loved, ideal for baking cookies and reading by the fireplace. I wish you could be here to see everything that is happening, I continued softly. I have so many questions about decisions you made, investments you chose, people you helped quietly over the years. But I am figuring it out step by step, and I think you would approve of the direction things are taking. In the months since inheriting their estate, I had discovered numerous quiet charities my grandparents had supported anonymously for decades. Children whose medical bills they had paid without seeking recognition. Families whose homes they had saved from foreclosure during difficult times. Employees whose children they had put through college without expecting gratitude or publicity. All of this generosity had been given without public recognition or praise, simply because it was the right thing to do. Thank you for trusting me with all of this, I whispered as tears blurred my vision. I understand now why you made the choice you did. It was never really about the money itself. It was about values, about using resources to create something meaningful rather than pursuing status or power. As I sat there surrounded by peaceful silence, memories washed over me with bittersweet appreciation rather than the sharp pain of early grief. I remembered Walter teaching me to fish with infinite patience, Margaret showing me how to make her famous apple pie from scratch, both of them attending every school play and graduation ceremony when my parents were always too busy with more important obligations. The inheritance had never been primarily about money or financial security. It had been about entrusting me with their legacy, their deeply held values, their vision of what wealth could accomplish when used with genuine purpose and compassion for others. The next evening, I hosted the Foundation's first major scholarship ceremony, honoring 20 exceptional high school seniors who would receive full college funding. As I watched these bright, determined young people accept opportunities that would completely change their life trajectories, I felt Margaret and Walter's presence more strongly than ever. Among the recipients was Maria Vasquez, a brilliant young woman who reminded me powerfully of myself at that age, full of unlimited potential but constrained by financial limitations. She planned to become an elementary school teacher to give back to her community, just as she had been supported and encouraged. As the celebration concluded, Maria approached me with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "My parents both work multiple jobs just to pay rent," she said emotionally. "No one in my entire extended family has ever attended college. This scholarship changes everything, not just for me personally, but for my younger siblings who now see higher education as genuinely possible." In that perfect moment, I understood completely what Margaret and Walter had been building throughout their entire lives. Not just a successful business or accumulated fortune, but a legacy of positive impact that would continue rippling outward, long after they were gone. They had trusted me to amplify that effect, to carry their values forward in ways they would never see but had always envisioned. The money had indeed revealed everyone's true colors, showing me clearly who valued wealth over relationships, but it had also revealed a community of genuine connection. People who had loved my grandparents for who they were as human beings, not what they owned or could provide. That was the real inheritance, more valuable than any dollar amount could ever be. As I continue moving forward with my new life, I keep teaching, running the foundation, and gradually learning the business world. The wealth allows me to amplify important work and create opportunities for others, but it does not define my identity or self-worth. I still live relatively simply, drive a practical car, and spend weekends volunteering rather than shopping for unnecessary luxuries. Margaret and Walter would definitely approve, I believe. They always said money was merely a tool, never a goal in itself. I finally understand completely what they meant by that wisdom. What is your experience with family dynamics and inheritance? Have you ever had to stand up to pressure from loved ones to do what you knew was right? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground and honor their own values. Remember, real family is about love, respect, and support, not obligation, manipulation, or financial advantage. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the strength to honor your own principles, whatever challenges you may face in your life.